Hey, Betsy.
Hi, how are you? Sorry,
No worries. You can hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you loud and clear. How are you?
Great, fine, thank you.
So where are you based out of?
Right now I'm in New York.
Oh, okay. New York City, obviously.
Yes, yeah.
Wonderful. So as we get started, in case anyone watching is not familiar with you or your background, why don't you just kind of kick things off and tell us about yourself, your experience, and then we can jump into some of the SPACs and whatnot.
Well, I appreciate it, Joan, and appreciate you taking the time. uh, I have been around the financial services area for a very long period of time. We're not going to designate exactly how long, uh, but it's allowed me to be trained as a lawyer, teach law in the areas of finance and etc. Practice law, go from there to uh, in the finance area to forming overseas leasing companies and move on from there to in the early 70s, started my first bank and gone on around the finance table ever since then. Uh, in 2000, I began a bank which was the first of its kind and sponsored non-bank fintech companies.
That's Bank Corp, right?
That's Bank Corp, formed in 2000. And when I decided to step back from being CEO in 2014, we had about 1,600 non-bank fintech companies on the platform, which is how I got to know the industry.
And what exactly did Bank Corp do?
It provided the banking functions for companies that were providing either technology or some other component of the fintech ecosystem, but themselves were not banks.
So
And
you're kind of like the godmother of FinTech.
you've got it.
So how long did you run Bancorp for?
How long did I run it for? I ran it for 14 years.
Okay.
So,
And now you've jumped into the SPAC world. So what attracted you to SPACs in the first place? And then when did you start your first SPAC or launch your first SPAC?
well, I think that when I stepped down from Bancorp, I thought that I might become retired, but it lasted about 8 days. And I realized it was not for me because there were so many wonderful companies out there that I had begun to see grow and develop over the course of that 14 years. It was really a seminal time for fintech companies and to grow and to understand their place in the marketplace. And many of them were begun, let's say, between 2005 and 2010, when adoption by consumers and others, small businesses and others, was on the upswing. And so there was, in fact, an audience, and they were able to scale in a very significant way. Uh, they are, it was an opportunity to look a little bit differently at these growth companies because they were all those that were good were growing and those that were not good were not growing. I mean, we're just having an opportunity to explore, but not to be successful. And so I was really able to begin to understand what might make a successful company and what might not. And from that, I took uh, another look at the mature companies in this group. They were not all mature, but those that might benefit in some way from being part of the public market as opposed to being in the private market.
What are the biggest benefits in your mind of being a public company?
I guess it depends really on the company. It's a company by company decision, but in fact, There are lots of areas within FinTech that are fragmented. So the opportunity for a good platform to make acquisitions is in fact, really done much better and much less expensively with a public company currency,
Right. You can use using their stock, basically.
using their stock in order to make the acquisition. I think for some companies, it's a branding exercise. Getting your name out into the marketplace is a very good thing. For others, it's really a recognition by the customers. They're often dealing with customers who are larger than they are.
Right. It does add a sense of credibility to the company.
Absolutely. And the customers all believe that there's greater transparency. And that the company will be around because it has access to the capital markets, which it might not have if it were a private company.
And if companies are going to go public, there's obviously a lot of disclosures and, like you said, transparency, auditing and whatnot. So you know that these companies are in strong financial shape. So when did you start your first SPAC?
2015, 8 days after I retired on December 31st of 2014, I began the launching of the first SPAC.
And which company did that SPAC end up acquiring or merging with?
It merged with Card Connect,
Okay.
which just about a year later was bought by First Data for 50% more than it was sent to the market.
So that's probably why a lot of us don't recognize the name of the company, is they weren't public very long.
No, this was a very fortunate situation for Card Connect and a very fortunate situation for the investors in the SPAC.
So fast forward a couple of years, and recently you've launched some new SPACs. You've done a handful of mergers. The three that I'd love to talk about today are eToro, Payoneer, and Perella Weinberg. So which one would you like to start with first?
Your choice.
Let's go with eToro, because I think they're probably the biggest of the three and maybe the most recognized, although Payoneer's a pretty recognizable name. So let's start with eToro. What attracted you to eToro and what they're doing and what the opportunity might be for investors?
Yeah, eToro, remember, is a company that's almost 14 years old. And so it began as a concept of its founders to bring information to young investors and novice investors so that they could both have access to trading at a reasonable price, but also have the opportunity to learn from one another, because the underpinnings of the trading platform is a social media platform, a social network platform in which you can learn from very experienced investors that they call popular investors, and therefore copy what they do.
Right.
And that's their trademark. So it's a learning experience as well as the opportunity to trade.
Because I think right now, if I remember correctly from the investor presentation, I think in Q1 of 2021, they reported somewhere around 18 or 19 million users of their platform.
Just north of 20.
Okay, 20. Wow. Any idea what percentage of those users are inside the US versus outside of the US?
At the moment, they are essentially ex-US. They have a crypto marketplace within the US and have been approved by FINRA to begin to trade in the US and are building out that platform. Should launch in the next 6 months.
Is that one of the reasons why they wanted to come public via SPAC now, in order to accelerate that growth into the US?
I think that was part of the reason, but not the whole reason. I think that they recognize that access to capital within a trading platform is a very important aspect of the company being well capitalized. They are very cognizant of risk and therefore always eager to be more than less well capitalized. They also recognize the branding opportunity, that there are people who might like to own the eToro stock and recognize the name, and that would certainly be very helpful. And I think they were ready. They were ready. They had diversified their income streams. They were trading many more assets.
Now, when you approach these companies and start talking about the idea of merging with one of your SPACs, are they already talking about going public in a traditional IPO? Are they talking to venture capitalists about raising another round of capital? What are you usually competing against those two other options?
Sure, all of the above. And as we saw in Coinbase, the indirect issuance as well. So a SPAC is one of those paths that a company can take to transition from the private to the public market. And I think they have to be thinking about this being the right time for them to be making that transition in order for our conversations to be successful.
Do you think because eToro is really a B2C platform and SPACs have become so popular with retail investors, do you think those two pieces fit together nicely for them?
I think that they do, but I think that very much more often, like Payoneer, you see B2B companies, because they're not looking for that same kind of branding experience, but they are looking for access to the public markets, the public currency that we talked about, and the ability to make acquisitions.
So let's talk about Payoneer. That's a good segue. Want to talk to us about what Payoneer actually does, and then what attracted you to them, and how you found them? I mean, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of FinTech companies all over the planet. How are you narrowing it down to the ones that you want to actually work with and merge with?
Remember, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I knew many of these companies when they were not ready to do anything.
Startups.
I knew, for example, Scott Gallett, who's the CEO. I knew professionally for 10 years before, the event which will take him public, is going to occur. So there are many of these people that I can assess as performers over a long period of time. And I think that that's an important element. I first met eToro, for example, maybe 3 years ago.
Okay.
And was able to talk to the company, understand what they were doing, and recognize that that was not the time for them to go public. But being very persistent, I just kept at it and kept going back and looking at these companies again and again, and did recognize together with management that the moment had come, both for Payoneer and for eToro, I think in the very same way, that this was a moment in which as much as could be accomplished within the private context had been accomplished, and that the next step was really an important one.
When we hear an announcement, the merger announcement or the acquisition, whatever you want to call it, how much time has passed before that in terms of conversations and due diligence before we actually hear about this? Is it 3 months, 6 months? Can you give us any clarity?
I have to come back to the fact that it's different for every organization, but depending upon how well I know the company and how well I know either members of the board or management, it can be a maybe 2 to 3 month process, 2 months generally, between the time that we sign the LOI and the time we'll make an announcement. In some markets, and of course it's market dependent also, right. In some markets and certainly over the course of the end of last year, it was a 30 to 45-day period.
Okay, because both companies, Payoneer and eToro, are based outside of the U.S., correct?
Payoneer is based partially in the US, but primarily outside the US because that's where its customers are.
Right,
And
right.
so they have on the ground teams which interface with the customers as well as have supporting their e-commerce efforts globally with the internet. Yeah.
Maybe can you talk to us now about what Payoneer does, and then maybe FinTech and payments is obviously a very, very hot space right now. PayPal has done phenomenally well. Shopify, Stripe, which is obviously still private. So talk to us about Payoneer, what they do, and then maybe where they fit into that whole ecosystem.
Payoneer services 5 million global businesses that are engaged in e-commerce. And they have, over the course of the last 10 years, built what they call trading networks, where you can send money from any place to any place, as they like to say, over the Payoneer account. It's an account which talks to the needs of a small to medium-sized, and some actually growing quite large, e-commerce issuer, and that issuer can be in a remote spot or based in New York City, but they're reaching a different part of their network, either the supplier or the purchaser over the Payoneer network. So they sit right there in the middle and service both sides.
Okay. Now, are they working with a lot of these large e-commerce marketplaces?
Yes, they service, and they just announced, I think it was about 30 days ago, they announced the fact that they will be servicing the eBay network out of Asia. So they have any number of networks and marketplaces that they're servicing. And then within those marketplaces, individuals who may sell on one or more of the marketplaces.
So do they compete against PayPal, would you say?
PayPal has traditionally not been a B2B payments company. It's been primarily B2C. I think it sees opportunity in the B2B area and may stretch its wings. But Payoneer is a real pioneer.
And now talk to us about Perella Weinberg. That's, out of the three, that's probably the one that people are not so familiar with. I've always thought of Perella Weinberg as an M&A advisory firm. Is that still true?
I think that that's where they started and that's where their roots were. So you're absolutely right. But I think that both corporate interactions and the globalization of companies coming together has really changed the definition of what the traditional M&A shop used to be. And so they provide a number of advisory services, but they are an independent advisor. So a company can take comfort in the fact that they're not advising on a merger today and then trying to place debt for them tomorrow. They are independent of other services and have built a network and are the most rooted, I would say, in the international sphere, primarily in Europe. And so I think that's one of their distinguishing characteristics.
Are they traditionally, when you say, so M&A advisory, is it large public companies? Is it smaller public companies, private companies? Do they have a niche that they focus on?
I think all of the above. I think that many of them come came, and remember the firm is 15 years old,
Okay.
so many of them came from large shops like Goldman and et cetera. So that would be their natural bent to be, and where their connectivity is, to be able to touch many of the very large companies. But I think from those roots, they have grown to provide much wider advisory services.
Now, do companies ever approach you knowing that you have these SPACs out there with money in trust? Do they ever approach you, or are you approaching them?
I would say they don't approach us or me more than 3 times a day. Uh, so there are a lot of companies that think that they are ready, that we as a group, and remember we have a platform, we're into our 11th SPAC. So on the platform, which we call FinTech Masala, there is a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge of all the elements that you need to execute a SPAC effectively. And so we have lots and lots of people who recognize that and reach out to us.
How big is your team right now that are working on these deals?
The team now is north of 15, and they have a wide range of expertise from technology through legal, through accounting and all the rest of it, capital markets, et cetera.
When companies approach you, and you decide, your team decides that it's just not, it's not the right time for them, they're just not the right fit, what are usually the the characteristics or attributes of that company that in your mind make them not ready to go public? Is it, revenues aren't high enough, profitability is too far out, the team isn't strong enough? What have you identified?
Yeah, I've identified all the things you just mentioned. Not that they're all in one company,
Right.
but it may be that what I'll call the corporate infrastructure, the way in which they do business, is not yet sophisticated enough and deep enough for them to be able to be a good public company. We're not just looking for companies that will take the journey to being a public company. We're looking 2 to 5 years out through the next spurt of growth for those companies. And so we're looking at a much longer term. You mentioned the path to profitability. We want to be able to document that. We want to be able to, since projections are a central part of the SPAC process as we approach investors, we want to make sure those are grounded in projections. And it's really hard to do that by simply pulling a wish number out of the air.
Which is what a lot of other SPACs do, or at least it seems that way. You see these investor presentations with revenue numbers going out 10 years, and they just seem so far-fetched.
Well, I think that there are people who are buying stocks who want to dream. But if they want to dream, they're going to have to dream with a different SPAC.
It does seem that the companies that you're taking public are more seasoned, more mature. They've been around for 8, 10, 14 years in some cases. It doesn't sound like you're trying to go after those fintech companies that were started 2 or 3 years ago and still have a lot of risks in their business, right?
I think you're absolutely right. We're looking really for, in the fintech area, execution is everything, as they say. And so we're looking for the hallmarks of that execution.
Any idea when we might see a couple more announcements on some of your other open SPACs?
I'm not allowed to say, but I'm always hopeful.
I figured. Anything we missed that you wanted to talk about?
No, I'm just delighted to be in conversation with you and knowing that you're reaching such an interested audience, because we believe that an important function that we play is not only to do this SPAC, so to speak, but to teach people about how to think about this as an investment. And so conversations like this, we hope, will be enlightening.
Maybe you can just tell us, how long do you and your team plan to be involved in these SPACs? Are you going to help them and advise them and own a piece of the company for the next 6 months, 12 months, 3 years? What's the time frame?
We're always what I'll call medium to long-term holders. So we're looking out we'd like a company that will be terrific in 3 years, that will both grow because innately it's providing something that is needed and because it's being well managed.
And I assume you have incentives to help that company grow, correct? I mean, if the share price hits certain numbers.
Our compensation for providing the services is in fact aligned with the company and the company's sellers and management. So
Okay, wonderful. Good.
we're only looking for good companies.
It sounds that way. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Betsy. I really, really appreciate it. I know you're a very busy woman, so it means a lot to me and all the viewers to have you here today.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Come back anytime.
Okay.
Happy Memorial Day. Take care.